7 machines lay the asphalt under almost every road, runway, and parking lot on Earth, starting with a paver barely wider than a garden path and ending with one that can finish a whole highway in a single pass. Between them sits a machine that does not lay any asphalt at all. It tears the old surface up first. This is every class of paver explained, small to the 18-meter giant that closes the show. Every highway starts with something this small. The Vögele Super 700i is a tracked mini paver barely wider than a garden path, built to lay asphalt on footpaths, cycle lanes, and the narrow patch jobs a highway crew would never touch. Vögele has built pavers in Ludwigshafen, Germany since the late 1940s, and this machine sits at the very entry point of that lineup, the first paver a city maintenance crew ever buys. Next to what comes later in this video, it looks almost toy-like, and that contrast is exactly the point. The Super 700i paves anywhere from 1.1 to 3.2 meters wide, adjusting hydraulically as the crew moves from a narrow footpath to a slightly wider access road. That range covers almost everything outside an actual highway lane. One operator rides a small platform or walks alongside, steering a machine that weighs a fraction of anything else in this lineup. Its hopper holds a couple of tons of hot mix at a time, enough for a short stretch before the delivery truck tips in more, and its diesel engine makes barely as much power as a family car. None of that is a weakness. A parking lot resurfacing job does not need a wide screed. It needs a machine that fits between two parked cars, and that is exactly what Vögele built this one to do. Fully extended, screed and all, the Super 700i is barely longer than a family SUV and stands about as tall as a person with one arm raised overhead. Park it beside any other machine in this lineup and it nearly disappears. Not every asphalt machine needs to be enormous. Some are built small on purpose. The Super 700i tops out at what a single narrow lane needs. A residential street or a small parking lot asks for more hopper and more push than that, without stepping up to full highway-class hardware. Vögele's answer is the Super 805i, the next size up in its mini paver family, and the machine neighborhood repaving crews across Europe and North America reach for by default. It still runs on tracks and still fits down an ordinary street, but everything about it is scaled up a notch from the 700i. Where the 700i moves material a truckload at a time, the Super 805i lays down up to 300 tons of asphalt an hour, roughly enough to resurface a 2-lane residential street in a single working shift. Its paving width still narrows down to half a meter for tight utility cuts, but stretches out to 3.2 meters for a full neighborhood lane. A larger hopper means fewer stops for the trucks feeding it, and a heavier frame holds a flatter line even when the base underneath is uneven. 300 tons an hour sounds abstract until you picture it as roughly 12 fully loaded dump trucks of hot mix, disappearing into the machine and rolling back out as smooth pavement, every hour, all day. Look at the trailing edge of the Super 805i, and you are looking at the part actually doing the paving. The screed plates slide outward on hydraulic extensions to widen the mat without stopping the machine, then vibrate and tamp the mix flat as the paver crawls forward. Everything ahead of it, the hopper, the conveyors, the augers, exists only to keep this one component fed. Tracked pavers are steady, but they are slow and awkward to move between jobs, sometimes needing a lowboy trailer just across town. A highway contractor running several sites in the same week needs a paver that can drive itself down the interstate at the end of a shift. The Vögele Super 2003 3i solves that by putting a full highway-class paver on rubber tires instead of steel tracks, trading a bit of stability for speed between job sites. Under the hood sits a Cummins QSB 6.7 diesel producing 186 kilowatts, 250 horsepower by the number contractors actually quote off the spec sheet. That is roughly the output of a heavy-duty pickup truck engine, except here it drives augers, conveyors, and a vibrating screed instead of a drivetrain. Its screed typically works out to around 7.5 meters wide on a standard highway lane. Because it rolls on wheels rather than tracks, the 2003 3i can relocate between sites at ordinary road speed instead of crawling there on a trailer. which matters when a crew has 3 separate stretches of interstate scheduled in the same week. The trade-off is grip. Rubber tires transmit less traction into soft or freshly graded base material than steel tracks do, which is exactly the gap its crawler sibling exists to close. End to end, the Super 2003 3i runs close to 6 meters, about the length of 2 mid-size cars parked nose to tail, and its cab sits roughly at head height for someone standing on the ground beside it. It is built to be driven to the next job, not hauled there, and its proportions show it. Rubber tires move fast on open pavement but slip on loose gravel base, steep grades and freshly placed subgrade, exactly the conditions found on new highway construction rather than simple repaving. The Super 2000-3i is the crawler counterpart to the 2003 3i, built on the same chassis and running the same engine, but riding on steel tracks instead of wheels. It exists specifically for the ground its wheeled sibling cannot cross. Vögele builds the 2003i around the identical Cummins QSB 6.7 engine as the 2003 3i, the same 186 kilowatts, the same 250 horsepower, so the real difference between these two machines is entirely in what touches the ground. Steel tracks spread the paver's weight over a far larger footprint than 4 tires ever could, the same way snowshoes spread a hiker's weight across snow, and that keeps ground pressure low enough to cross freshly placed base material without rutting it. Operating weight comes in around 20 tons. That stability shows up directly in the finished mat, because a paver that rocks or slips as it moves transmits every bump straight into the screed trailing behind it. Contractors typically run one of each in a fleet: tires for the quick relocations between finished roads, tracks for the rough, ungraded ground where a highway is still being built rather than resurfaced. The undercarriage is where this machine earns its keep. Wide steel tracks run the length of the chassis, spreading the paver's full operating weight over enough ground contact area that it barely leaves a mark on the base course it just crossed. It is the one part of the 2000-3i that looks nothing like its wheeled sibling. Highway pavers like the 2003i and 2003 3i handle one lane comfortably, sometimes a lane and a half, but a full motorway carriageway or an airport runway strip needs to go down in one unbroken pass, with no seam where 2 adjoining strips meet. The Vögele Super 2100 3i was built to close that gap. It is the widest machine in Vögele's -3 generation, the paver contractors reach for specifically when a project cannot afford a longitudinal joint down the middle of the road. Fully extended, the Super 2100-3i pushes its screed out to 13 meters, 42 feet 8 inches, wide enough to pave both directions of a rural highway or a full runway strip in one continuous mat. At that width, it lays down up to 1,200 tons of asphalt an hour, a rate that would empty a small quarry's daily output before lunch. Vögele markets it as the most powerful paver in the entire -3 generation, and the engine bay backs that claim up. Built to drive a screed assembly that at full width outweighs some of the smaller pavers earlier in this lineup on its own. Airports are where this machine earns its keep. A runway resurfaced in overlapping strips creates joints that crack under repeated aircraft loading, years before the rest of the pavement fails, so airport contractors pay for the extra width specifically to avoid that seam. Parked with its screed folded in for transport, the base machine still runs about 7 meters long and stands taller than a person can reach, with an arm stretched overhead. Extend the screed to its full 13 meters, and the whole assembly is wider than most residential houses. The hydraulic extensions bolted to each side of the main screed are what get this machine out to 13 meters. They telescope outward in sections as the paver moves, and every added meter of width means another few tons of steel and heating elements the frame has to carry without sagging out of level. None of this paving matters if the surface underneath is already cracked, rutted, or worn through to the base layer. Before any Vögele paver rolls out, something has to strip the old asphalt off first, down to a clean, level surface the new mat can bond to. That machine is the Wirtgen W 220 Fi, a large cold milling planer, and despite not laying a single ton of asphalt itself, it is as essential to this paving train as any machine on this list. An 801 horsepower Cat C18 diesel drives the W220 Fi. More power than either highway-class Vögele Paver in this lineup, and nearly all of it goes into spinning a single cutting drum studded with carbide picks. That drum chews through old asphalt up to 2.2 meters wide and 330 millimeters deep in one pass, grinding a worn-out road surface into fragments small enough to load straight onto a waiting truck. Machines like this are why modern repaving rarely means burying old pavement under new. It means removing exactly the damaged layer and replacing it, which keeps roads from slowly gaining height at every intersection and bridge clearance over decades of resurfacing. 800 horsepower into a rotating drum is close to the combined output of 3 of the highway pavers earlier in this lineup, all of it spent tearing a road apart rather than building one. Wirtgen, based just up the road from Vögele in Germany, has built milling machines like this since the 1970s, and both brands now sit under the same corporate roof. Hidden inside the milling chamber underneath the machine sits the actual cutting drum, a steel cylinder studded with hundreds of replaceable carbide tips. It spins fast enough to grind old asphalt into rubble in a single pass, and those tips wear down so quickly on abrasive pavement that crews carry spare sets by the box. Once a machine like the W220 has stripped a worn stretch of highway down to bare base, somebody has to put back more asphalt, faster and wider than any single paver on this list has handled yet. That machine is the Vögele Super 3000 23i, and fitted with its widest available screed, it can pave a full 18-meter carriageway in one uninterrupted pass, the single widest job any highway paver in this video can do. Fitted with the SB350 fixed-width screed, the Super 3000 3i extends out to 18 meters, wide enough to pave an entire multi-lane carriageway plus shoulders without a single longitudinal joint anywhere across the surface. Its engine produces 354 kilowatts, close to 475 horsepower, and at full output the machine lays down up to 1,800 tons of hot asphalt an hour. Picture 90 fully loaded dump trucks emptying into one paver in a single hour, and that is roughly the material flow this machine is built to swallow without slowing down. A screed this wide does not really steer. It gets positioned once and held dead level for kilometers at a time, because the smallest tilt across an 18-meter mat becomes a drainage problem the highway carries for the next 20 years. By width and by tonnage, it is the largest single-pass paver Vögele builds, and every smaller machine in this lineup is, in effect, a scaled-down version of the same idea. Even with its screed folded in for transport, the base chassis of the Super 3000 3i runs longer than a city bus and stands roughly 2 body heights above a person walking beside it. Unfolded across a highway, its 18-meter screed stretches wider than a 6-lane road. Every paver earlier in this lineup carries some smaller version of this same component, a heated plate that tamps and smooths hot asphalt flat behind the machine. At 18 meters wide, the SB350 is that same simple idea, grown into something that can finish an entire highway without ever needing to match its own seam.